Today we're going to be looking at the question of how to share the gospel without being pushy, but at the same time being intentional about sharing the gospel. Trying to find that balance can be a little tricky. Often people quote from Francis of Assisi, who said that we should always preach the gospel and when necessary use words. The problem with that idea is that the Bible tells us to use words when we share the gospel. There's no other way to share the gospel than with words. Listen to these words from Paul, who writes in Romans chapter 10, starting with verse 13. For everyone who calls in the name of the Lord will be saved. How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? Somebody has to preach the gospel. Somebody has to share it verbally. It is important to live out the gospel, no question about it. But one does have to share those words. One of the tricks is to share those words with respect. And I think Peter gives us a really good insight into how to do that in 1 Peter chapter 3, starting in verse 15. It says, But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet, do it with gentleness and respect. So I think as we try to find a balance with sharing the gospel, we should err on the side of speaking it, proclaiming it, preaching it, whatever verb you want to use, but articulate it in some way verbally. That's how the gospel spread throughout the Bible and in the early church, and that's how it's being spread today. But we should not neglect living a life that brings glory to God by living out the gospel. And when we share the gospel with somebody, we should do it with respect. We should never be hesitant to share the gospel. We should never be too passive to think that we don't need to share the gospel, because the Great Commission calls us to share the gospel. So we should verbalize the gospel. We should live out the gospel, and we should do it with respect, so that in doing all of those things, God gets the glory. Thank you.